Hey folks, in this episode I had the chance to sit down with James Davenport from North American Rescue. He was a Special Forces medic, lost his leg in combat, and tells a story of what it's like to live in the legacy of his father who came to America to join the military and live his life in service. He also talks about the importance of passing the message and the lessons on that you get in life. I hope you enjoy it. Okay. All right, so we're rolling. My name is Eddie Molina, and this is The Call, the name of our podcast. So we are in Greenville, South Carolina at the South Carolina Active Attack Conference, and I am sitting with North American Rescue's James Davenport, and we're going to be talking a little bit about medicine and training and gear and what's important at the time you need it.
Whatever else we get into.
Yeah, exactly. All right, James, so tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
I grew up here in the upstate of South Carolina, as you can't tell from the southern accent. Was a firefighter paramedic until 9/11, joined the Army shortly thereafter, became an Army SF medic, 18 Delta, and did that for 16 years and then retired after, having a bad hopscotch match with an IED.
Oh,
so, and now I work at NOC.
Cool. So was there I guess, are you legacy? Was there a lineage of service in your family?
Yeah, my dad served 32 years in the Army, retired as a command sergeant major at the 82nd. And then, he didn't want that for me, and I kind of steered clear of it for a little while, knowing that there was something always missing,
right,
from your life, or my life. And then after 9/11, said that I'd put off, what I was built to do long enough, and enlisted in the Army.
That's
so,
awesome.
Loved it. Wouldn't change, certainly I wish I hadn't been injured the way I was and had been able to serve longer, but God puts us on a path sometimes that, it isn't of our liking. So,
yeah, I always had a hard time buying into that whole deal, but man, it just seems like the more and more you actually pay attention to that message, it's true, because you end up in those spots where you really need to be. And we're talking a little bit off camera, and we'll hit that in a little while. But we're talking about who's the best surgeon, who's the best medic, who's the best person for you, and just where you end up at is very important. So 9/11 hit. You had a sense of duty. You got a call to join in. And tell me about your path into the military. Where did you go to first when you signed up?
I enlisted in the National Guard. I had always had I don't want to say a yearning, but there was a call to the Special Forces mission, the unconventional warfare piece. It just seemed to call to me, and because of my age at the time, 30, they seemed to offer a better, path to my Green Beret or a Green Beret than the active military. And so I enlisted in the Alabama National Guard and left a couple months later for basic training. And so off to Fort Benning I went.
All right. Was the X-ray program, or what was that?
The National Guard had several different names for it. Rep 63, some of them called them the 18 X-ray program. That was really safe for the active Army, more than that number doesn't mean anything in the Guard. 18 X-ray. So, but the term was tossed around a fair bit, unconventionally.
Okay, so Fort Benning.
Yep.
So that's where you went to first for training.
Yep, I did infantry school at Fort Benning, and then airborne school, and then left there for Fort Bragg for a program that was called SOPC, or Special Operations Preparedness Course, a preparation course, one of the two, that was taught at Bragg by group guys to get 18 X-rays and National Guard guys ready to go to selection. Oh. So the idea was that they were going to teach the things that we didn't have time to learn like other folks that were assessing into special forces from inside the Army. So what it ended up being was them teaching probably 90% of what selection was going to be and preparing us to just, pass the test, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
did you know that at the time? I mean, when people start teaching us, we go to classes all the time, right? And a lot of times, so I can speak from the law enforcement side. I did 25 years in law enforcement. I can speak from our side. A lot of times you get sent to training you didn't really want to go to, but where you were at, you knew that you wanted to be there. So I'm imagining that it was a ton of training, just kind of like water falling onto you, just sending stuff to you. Did you realize they were giving you that much information to help you pass the course?
Well, I don't know that it was information that they were passing as much as it was the physical training and getting us ready physically to attend selection. I mean, we pretty much, got kicked in the butt 7 days a week. So it was more, like I said, physical than it was mental.
Okay. So I get what you're saying. And coming from the background where your dad was command sergeant major in 82nd, so you were raised in that military mindset. You had a different upbringing than a lot of kids out there. So your mental preparedness was probably a little bit better than some others. Your mental outlook on training and such, you probably took it in a little bit different. Did you see across the board when you got into that SOPSI program? Did you see that there was a lot of people that struggled with the mental part of it?
Yeah, there's certainly a fair amount of guys that they either didn't know what being an SF was going to be like, and they thought it was something completely different, or the amount of time that we were basically kicked in the ass, they weren't prepared for either. So every morning during formation, instructors would ask, all right, who's ready to quit? And then you had to literally walk up onto a stage with a gong in your hand and ring a gong, and then, collect up your stuff and get ready to go to Korea. So at the SOPSI program, everybody there was 11 series infantrymen. Vice, being at selection, you have every MOS in the Army or military occupation in the Army going through selection with you, cooks and comms guys, engineers, infantrymen, clerks, and intel guys, all kinds of stuff. So,
wow. All right. So SOPSI, how do you remember how long SOPSI was?
4 weeks.
4 weeks. So that's a pretty short time. It's pretty, you get hammered in that. So you go from SOPSI to where?
Selection.
Straight to selection.
Yep. SOPSI ends on a Friday. Monday morning, you're at selection.
No kidding.
Yep. It was, like the idea when they first designed it, because SOPSI was actually started by the Guard, and it had a completely different name, the National Guard, that is. And so the National Guard guys or groups would send guys to Fort Bragg to SOPSI to get them ready physically over 4 weeks, send them to selection, get them back from selection, put them in another preparedness course for the next phase of training, and then when the Army started up the 18 X-ray program again, they're like, we don't need to create something, it's already here. So they just kind of took that piece over, and it just worked out that, it ends or selection starts on a Monday, it ends on a Friday. So, but the grand idea is that they push you right up to the point of peaking, so that when you're at selection, you're not so beat down that you can't compete with other people of the same mindset. So
totally makes sense. So I don't know if you grew up, if you had both your parents with you, but so I know I had both my parents growing up, and when I was fixing to go into the police department, I didn't tell them I had applied, and I let them know. It's like, hey, I'm going through the application process, so someone's going to come and talk to you, someone's going to come ask you questions about me. And it's funny, so people expect the dad to be the hard charger, and you go do it, good for you. My dad was 101st. And so so it was funny, and for whatever reason in my family, it was reversed. And mom was all about good. I think she probably expected, like, damn, I'm glad you have a job.
That's awesome.
But yeah, mom was all about it, and dad was like, are you sure you really want to do this? And so it just, for me, it was funny because I didn't expect that to be the take. Did you get that reaction from your parents?
Both my parents were deceased at that time.
Oh, okay.
But I'm pretty sure my dad would have been kicking me in the backside. You know, like, this is you've got a great job.
I told
Don't
you not
just-
to do
yeah,
it.
don't
Oh,
like
wow.
you know. He was he immigrated here from Israel to join the army in 1942 to go to Germany to kill Germans or to kill Nazis,
Yeah.
which just happened to be German. But and he didn't really talk a lot about his service, so he spent from 42 to 74 in the army, and then retired. I was a little, tyke running around, so I don't remember much at all about him in service. But he, along with a lot of folks from that era, just didn't talk a lot about their service. They carried a lot of stuff with them that they probably just soon not talk about. But,
Yeah.
He felt that he had paid, enough a price for us that
For his whole family. Yeah.
that we wouldn't have to. But looking back, like, freedom is something that every generation has to secure for the future generations.
Wow.
And
That's a huge story. I had not heard a whole bunch of those stories, but I mean, immigrating here to get into the military to do his part, that's a huge thing. Like you said, freedom's it's not free, obviously.
no.
But what a huge story. Do you all have that written down? You have that type of a story written down about your all's lineage? Because that sounds like a great story to pass on.
It was my dad and 4 brothers.
Wow.
Got on a ship, landed in Ellis Island, and then joined the Army. My dad's the only one of the guys that spent a career. Everybody else finished their time shortly after World War II was ended and got out and went to work in, all kinds of different industries. A couple of them were farmers. So,
Wow, that's pretty awesome. You talked a little bit about how that generation just learned to keep everything bottled up, and that's part of the big change right now is the whole journey in the mental health, the whole mental health area. And it seems like that's opening more and more. It's like the newer generations. I know on the cop side, we have that talk a lot. Me and my friends have talked about that, man, the next generation. And everybody all the old guys always have something weak to say about the next generation. But with these things, the whole mental health awareness opening up, I think that the next generation is going to be more well prepared for the afterwards. Because I just don't, I see a lot of cops coming out of their jobs fighting the demons. I mean, the stuff that we didn't pay attention to is like, working more than one job at the same time and trying to provide and doing all that. But one of the things that you talked about, you talked about your family and you talked about that story. I think it's huge. One thing that I wish I had done that I didn't do over my 25 years is had written stories going along. And I tell my friends that I say, if I had sat and wrote one chapter for every year that I worked, I'd have a 25-chapter book to give to my kids that their kids could give to their kids. And I'm not an all-star cop. I had the chance to do a lot of fun stuff. I worked in special operations units, so I did a lot of cool SWAT stuff. I worked undercover for a while, and I had a lot of good times. But I could only imagine what the book would be like from your dad immigrating to come over here to serve and rising to the level of command sergeant major. I mean, you can't get higher than that.
No, not unless you have desire to be Sergeant Major of the Army, which I don't think he was political enough to, get there on his best days, much less at the end of the career.
That's awesome. Man, that's a great story. Man, I'd love to hear more about that. So you pursued Special Forces, and so you go into the selection side, and what was that training like? 'Cause, I mean, I've heard so many stories about that. What was your experience?
A lot of physical, a lot of mental. Like, we don't really talk a whole lot about selection. The part about selection with SF is you show up with either the tools and the temperament needed to do the job, or you don't. A lot of people look at it like, well, I wasn't good enough to be in Special Forces. And there's certainly folks that aren't what SF was looking for, but there's a huge difference between not being the kind of soldier or not having the mindset necessary to do that type of work than being a bad soldier. There's plenty of individuals that show up to selection, great soldiers, but they don't have the temperament or the mindset
Sure.
to, work with indigenous personnel in a foreign language, and, yeah. So like I've got several stories of guys that were hard chargers, physical studs, but could not take the unconventional nature of selection, and it broke them. So it's 24 days long, and you're, at the end, if you quit, they leave you there in a hut across from all the guys that are going through selection, so you can watch every morning when the guys go out to continue to run or do ruck marches or team week events, whatever the case may be. So it's not like if they quit, they, are on a vacation. They literally have to sit there and watch us continue to do what they couldn't.
Wow.
Or chose not to do. So, but it's certainly not you're a bad soldier, that's why you didn't make it in SF or didn't get selected. And like I said, I think much more of it's mental than it is physical.
Sure.
So,
I was talking to a couple of other 18 series guys, and they termed it information deprivation.
Yep.
And holy smokes, I had never heard that before in training, but just thinking about it kind of makes your hair stand up. I mean, when I had hair, but I mean, it's wild to think that that's part of the smartest part of training there is, because that's part of your mission.
Yeah, you've got to be capable of working with little information.
Yeah.
If you're a dress right dress, like have to know everything's going on every minute of the day, it will not be a good time for you at selection. And aside between that and not being a team player, some guys just don't work well. Strong, smart, just don't do well as a team. Because once you put multiple guys together with varying personalities, varying temperaments, all of that stuff comes to play, especially when you're deployed overseas and it's, just the 12 of you, if your team has 12 guys on it, surrounded on all the sides by bad guys. So you have to be able to, live for 8 months in those conditions with a bunch of ambiguity.
Yeah.
And I would say it's that ambiguity that is problematic for a lot of guys.
So I've asked a question before of other guys coming from the Special Forces side, Special Operations side. If there's a kid out there watching or listening right now that has the ideas of going forward into the Special Operations or Special Forces side of the military, and they wanted to be that kind of person, I've asked that question before. What would you ask them to do? But let me change the question up for you a little bit. What would you advise their parents to do? How would you advise their parents to focus?
That's a good question. The hard part is I don't know that it's something you can prepare somebody for, right? Like if I told you we were going to have a test on Monday and told you that it was a math test, to study math. Or, if it was a Spanish test or English or whatever the topic is, right? But if I just told you I'm giving you a test on Monday, how do you prepare for the ambiguity of that test?
Yeah.
So you either, like I said earlier, a lot of selection is it's the person that you are, not the person you can prepare to be in a shorter period of time. We all know that if you're going to assess for something like that, you need to be in top physical shape. Yeah. There are people who show up, can't pass a PT test on day one. Like when you take a PT test in the Army, they count the reps for you. At SF selection or at SFAS, Special Forces Assessment Selection, when you take a PT test, they count the first 10 push-ups and the first 10 sit-ups, and you don't get anything else after that 10.
Wow.
So you don't know how many they're counting, but you know how many you need to do to pass, right? Or to get a certain score. So you're either going all the way up and coming all the way down, or you're not. And they're not there to cheat you, and they're certainly not there to cheat the regiment. Right. So they're not giving you stuff that you didn't earn, but they won't take anything from you that you don't have to give. So, but you have to be, you show up who you are. So that's why, like if you look at the whole of the Special Forces Regiment, the type of personalities that are driven into that field are people that can work by themselves with very little direction, that are focused, and that don't die under ambiguous circumstances, or that whose drive isn't diminished by ambiguity.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right, cool. That's a lot. I
you
mean,
know-
and it's a tough question. So we're talking, as you were talking, I was thinking about that, and I've asked the same question of different professions or different sides of the military and the first responder world, but I never think about that. It's like, I know that, like I said, it's like I had a lot of good knowledge coming into me in my upbringing. My parents sent my sister and myself to a college preparatory high school. And they wanted us all to go to college, and I don't know that made a difference, or I didn't know that made a difference at the time, but going forward, it did. I saw that it did, and it's just, I just wonder if there was something that you guys would recommend, because I think that's important. I think that's an important message for us to send, not just as old people sending it to other parents, but from specialized groups like yourselves. Like, I think that's an important message for us to get out there. And it's like, and because I do think there'd be a better world if we had focus on how we're raising our kids.
Oh, I do not disagree with that in the least bit.
Yeah.
But again, like, it's ambiguous, for a
Yeah.
reason, like the information deprivation. The instructors, like, they didn't come and tell you what you needed to prepare, when you needed to have it ready, blah, 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 blah. It was that you needed to stay prepared to do anything at any time under any circumstance, right? Like, a lot of schools in the military, you show up, take a PT, or in process the course, take a PT test, and then start learning material. You could be 22 days into selection before you take a PT test, but having done a 10-mile or 12-mile run, twice a week, or a 12 to 18-mile ruck march with a 55 pounds plus water twice a week, on top of the runs and everything else, and then take a PT test at the end, and still have to pass the PT test with the same score that you would have if you passed it day one, or if you took it day one. So, and the instructors, they'd walk out of their hooch, write something on the board, go back in the hooch. They could walk out and write, PT test, PT uniform, 0800. Or they could walk out and write 1 loaf of bread, 2 eggs, spatula. And then somebody's got to run over there, look at the board, and then run back, and then pass that message around to all the huts where their selectees housed. So somebody's always got to be watching that board 24 hours a day.
Yeah,
And that's where the information comes from, the board.
Wow.
And then whether you walk out there with your ruck, and when you know what the weight is, the weight never changes, but like at the front and at the end, your ruck is weighed. And if it weighs less at the end than it weighed at the beginning, somebody's taking something out of your ruck, i.e. you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or you weight it and then try to run back in the hooch so you could drop some weight, so that then you are rucking with lighter weight. That crap is not, like, that is a definite grab your shit and move to the other hut kind of thing. Because if you will basically screw the rest of the guys and try to participate at a lower level here at selection, you will do it downrange. Fall asleep at watch, not have a piece of material that you're supposed to have, any number, walk around with a phone that has a signal that a tower's looking for in an area where you shouldn't have a phone. I mean, any number of things. So, if I was to offer advice to parents, it would be to raise your children to a standard that you would be proud of if it was displayed on TV for everybody to see.
That's pretty good. I like that. Yeah, I like that.
So I got my backside beat a lot as a kid because I have a smart mouth. Like, if you ask me a question, the first thing that comes to my mind is something smart to say, and so I got to beat that back in my head. And, it got beat back into me a lot as a kid. But the one thing that I was never allowed to do is I was never allowed to quit.
That's awesome.
And I tell, kids today when I'm talking to the youth is that once you quit once, the next time becomes easier. Yeah. And then it becomes a serial problem when it could be nipped at the bud. Like anything that I chose to do as a kid, my dad, there was no quitting. Once you start, I don't care he didn't care how bad it sucked, or what he had to do to continue to help. Like I was finishing what I started.
That's big. Yeah, that's definitely a message I've tried to ingrain in my kids as we've gone along. And I think that pays off. That pays dividends down the road. So selection, you go through selection, you get assigned. You find out right away where you're getting assigned to, or how do you end up going from there?
Well, because I went through selection as a guard guy, I knew right down to the company where I was going. Active guys at that time did not. Later on through the course, the rest of the guys were notified where they were going, what group, what language they would, end up studying, so forth and so on. And so the language determines the group, the group determines the language as well. But so because each SF group has a regional orientation overseas, the languages, like it would make no sense for somebody assigned to 7th group, which is Latin and South America, to take Russian.
Right.
It may here shortly, but
the times are changing. Yeah,
it is. But so they're all of those are regionally oriented. So most guys, once they got their language, they can figure out where they're going.
Right. What was yours?
I took French in the course,
okay.
And then but was assigned to a company that was assigned to South America. So
okay.
Yeah, my first trip overseas was to Colombia.
Oh,
so,
okay.
French speaker in Colombia. I had a lot of learning fast.
Yeah. So did you already know you were going to go into the medical side?
Yeah. So I had been a firefighter paramedic on the civilian side prior to enlisting, and it just seemed, I enjoyed medicine. Probably should have been a surgeon at some point, but I decided to be a dirt doctor instead. But it just seemed natural that I would continue that education and, be a better medic.
Sure.
So,
yeah. Okay. So after that, you're going to, what was the time span between that before you went to your 18 Delta school?
I want to say about 3 months. Yep. So once I'd done with selection, then the next piece was SOPC Part 2, which was preparation for small unit tactics, like advanced infantry tactics, or a shorter version of Ranger School.
Okay.
And then after that, I was my MOS portion, which was the 18 Delta course.
Awesome.
So,
how long was that?
56 weeks.
Holy smokes! Wow. So
Yeah,
I've heard some good stories about 18 Delta school. What was the toughest part for you?
Toughest part. Well, we talked about this earlier. It was me forgetting what I thought I knew so that they could teach me what I needed to know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that are either nurses, medics, PAs that go to the 18 Delta course and it doesn't work out well for them because they refuse to unlearn certain things or learn them a different way.
Right.
So, as a matter of fact, we had a PA in our class that did not make it.
No kidding.
Nope. He quit, but that's as good as getting kicked out. He just would not, just refused to unlearn certain things. So,
do you feel like the stuff and you had to unlearn stuff to learn it back a different way? Do you feel like it was packaged better when you got it back the second time?
I wouldn't say it's packaged better, but learning to, I could give you tons of examples, but combat medicine and paramedicine from a civilian EMS side is wholly different. Not just the under gunfire part, but a paramedic arrives on scene to a car accident or chest pain, whatever the patient is. He drove an entire toolbox to the call with him. In the field, I can't carry all of that stuff that's in an ambulance in my aid bag. So I have to choose how to pack my aid bag to cover the most amount of injuries I can that would induce, the patient would die from at the end of the day, in as small a section as possible in my aid bag. So you learn to, instead of having a whole bunch of single-use items, carrying items that you can that have multiple purposes.
I got you.
So, like, at the time, there wasn't a commercially available pelvic binder for pelvic fractures. So I would take a aluminum malleable SAM splint, fold it lengthwise, and then cut slits in it that I could weave a tourniquet through, wrap around the patient's pelvis, and then pull it tight to close their pelvis back down in open pelvic fractures, open book pelvic fractures. So by having one item that does just that, and then when it's separate, the SAM splint's a SAM splint. I can use it for ankles, wrists, forearms, humerus fractures. The only really thing you can't use it for is a femur fracture. But, and then the tourniquet's just that, a tourniquet. So, but they have different uses, completely.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit off camera before about how the training has evolved. So I'm guessing it was 2002 then when you went through 18 Delta School?
2003.
2003. So from 2003 to now, was it 2022, right?
Yep.
So almost 20 years later, what's the biggest change? Because I know you're still involved. So you work at North American Rescue, and one of the biggest distributors or manufacturers of medical supplies. And I know we see a lot of it out there in the training world and in the first responder world. What's the biggest change? Or let me ask you this: there been a bigger change in the training or in the equipment?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
The equipment has, I think, the equipment, like between the high fidelity mannequins, the AI that go into ultrasounds and things of that nature, it has increased exponentially to meet the demand. Like if you couldn't start an IV during the course, back when we were in the course, the guy got stuck a whole bunch of times. Like we didn't have IV arms. So we just practiced on each other, sometimes in the middle of class, sometimes we do trauma PT. And so you go for a long run or carry somebody on a fold up litter while you're wearing gas masks. And once you set them down, everybody had to have an IV started in their ankle or, like it was always someplace painful, like as opposed to the meaty part of the forearm or the antecubital area. So, but the training adjuncts has, not only training adjuncts, but the equipment that is being carried today on the battlefield has just improved exponentially. And so with that, the training has to improve. It was bad enough we had to carry, 100 pounds worth of stuff in a 25-pound bag. Now you've got, more. So, but that's a hard question. Yeah. Which one's improved most? The equipment, absolutely. One of the things that I think has I wouldn't say improved, but people expect that there's a device to do everything. And oftentimes that's not the case, especially in public safety. Oftentimes that's not the case.
Right.
And so, sometimes the simplest solution is really the simplest solution.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, what we call sticks and rags, splinting and putting bandages on people is still useful regardless of how far that stuff moves forward.
Sure.
So,
I got you. So, what was the biggest change in training that you've seen from your time at starting? Hell, you had a lot of medical training before you went into the military as well, but up to now, what's the biggest change in training that you've seen?
Biggest change in training,
or biggest improvement?
Gosh, that's another hard question. The ability to have feedback immediately either a mannequin or a training adjunct that tells you if you're doing it right or not, instead of having to wait to the end to see if you've done it right. So
Okay.
like I mentioned earlier, like training mannequins. When I was in the course, there was talk about mannequins replacing some of the training aids that we used. At the time, we thought it would be detrimental to the force to replace some of the more realistic training with mannequins, but
Right.
they've moved the technology has moved so far forward that I don't know that differentiation exists today the way we viewed it to earlier in my career. So, like we have mannequins today that the chest rises and falls on one side or the other. So if you're trying to simulate a tension pneumothorax, patient shot in the chest, like you can make one side rise and the other side not, vice me putting stickers on a role player, laying them on the ground, and then they can't simulate that.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of just being like, well, what's contralateral chest movement look like? Where one side does something, the other side doesn't, or opposite. And so, like, you can actually show the students what that would look like, or lung sounds, things, so you don't have to listen to 2,000-3,000 patients, so that the variations in lung sounds, different patients having different problems. Now that's important because you still need to listen to them, but we have better tools to train medics on, and physicians for that matter, today than we've ever had. So, mannequins.
So medicine's a very specialized training, and I know that in the Special Forces you all have 18 deltas, and that's the medical specialist. But the Special Forces has a way of making sure that everybody knows a little bit about everybody else's job. And that's very important, small team tactics, small team community. But I do know that back in where only certain guys went to the combat lifesaver school, right? And only certain people, I know that on the law enforcement, I love it. On the law enforcement side, some guys had medical training. If you went to medical training, then the tourniquets started coming out and everybody started getting a little bit of training. But now it seems like everybody's getting medical training at some point, more advanced medical training, which I love seeing out on the first responder side. We push out a ton of more advanced medical training as well. And it also seems like back in the day, you could only do medical training in certain places. And it seems like now, especially you guys, have taken it out to the field. And we're going to go train where you're going to go fight. What have you noticed about those types of changes, or has that been pretty consistent across the board? Like I said, you guys were probably ahead of the curve on that, but have you seen those kinds of changes on the military side as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of EMS was speaking specifically for the public safety side of things. Like back in the day, a lot of that training was didactic in nature, and so you would watch videos or listen to a lecture, and there wasn't a lot of hands-on, and so. But you were expected to be able to perform without ever having put your hands on it before, just watching a video, right? And there's nothing more that I hate than an expectation for performance when you've never performed to that expectation, right? So we were talking earlier about tourniquets, right? Like, so today there's training tourniquets that you can beat the crap out of with application over and over and over and never have to worry about ruining a functional tourniquet, or that functional tourniquet that you're going to wear on your kit every day, taking it to the field after you've applied it 1,000 times to somebody else, or mannequins or role players, and then have it break on you. And so it's watching people, there's nothing that replaces performance on demand, I would say.
I know when we started a good medical training program at ALERRT, and we were pushing out, we did tourniquets, and we did obviously opening airways, stopping the bleeding and all, but we were doing wound packing. And at the time when we were teaching wound packing, there was a ton of EMS units across the country that was just not allowed.
It wasn't allowed here in South Carolina until just a few years ago.
And it's crazy because that seems to be the standard now. It's like, if you don't at least know how to do that, it's like, how are you going to actually stop the bleeding if you can't get to the bleeding?
Right.
So I was invited to come to, I had some friends that were PJs that were working in a cadaver lab. They was like, come on, do that over here on a real body.
Right.
And that experience, so they said, you're going to come to train with us, but you may end up having to teach some of the guys that are here. It's like, what the hell? It's like, I have no credibility in teaching that stuff. It's like, yeah, but you've done it more times in training than the EMTs that we're about to teach. And these are guys that were coming from my hometown fire department that had no experience with wound packing, and we were running them through wound packing drills on bodies, and it's like it was something brand new for them. So cadaver lab training was just unreal. What kind of experience was that for you guys?
I love cadaver labs.
Yeah.
My first time in a cadaver lab was during the 18 Delta course. And let me step back and say, like, even if you go to a paramedic program that's a 4-year bachelor's degree program, like the vast majority of them across the U.S. still don't use cadavers. It's still 2-dimensional anatomy. And there is nothing that replaces 3-dimension, being able to see it in the body from different aspects.
Yeah.
But with respect to the wound packing piece, you've got to get your hands in people.
Yeah.
To practice wound packing. Like, there's all kinds of adjuncts, task part trainers, and whole mannequins that you can do wound packing on, but no amount of silicone moves like real tissue.
Yeah. And it's neat. I've seen some really cool training tools that are coming out now. Yeah, I actually talked to some of the guys from a different distributor, and they were talking about their products they're sending them out there, and that's great. But yeah, until you get your hands on and somebody's actually been shot,
right,
it's a different experience. And hopefully it's not your first experience.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. When I'm teaching, like, I talk a lot about the amount of people I treated downrange or when I was deployed, and I would take every opportunity to treat host nation folks, whether they were host nation partner forces or it was the enemy. But if I got to see a wound on them before I got to see it on one of my guys, I was taking every opportunity I had to treat those wounds because I didn't want it to be one of my dudes that was the first time I got to see that wound. And you get some practice at it. It's, wound packing isn't all that it's made out to be, it hurts. As being somebody who's had a very significant wound packed in the field, it is quite painful.
Wow.
And that's one of the topics that I think is passed over with a lot of wound packing is, how are you going to stabilize that patient? Meaning, how are you going to keep them from, right crossing or left hooking you while you've got your hands buried in their pelvis or in their armpit, axillary region, all the way up to the wrist, trying to get at an artery.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that crap hurts.
Yeah. And so in the movies, it seems easy.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Just like tension pneumothorax and King of, what was that? Dang it. Movie from the 90s. King of, George Clooney movie.
Oh, okay.
With,
it's like Mark Wahlberg.
Ice Cube.
And
Yep.
I got you. Yeah.
With that, honestly, that's the best representation of a tension pneumothorax reacting to being, having a needle drill or a needle thoracentesis.
Yeah.
That I've ever seen. As a matter of fact, that video was used in the 18 Delta course for a while until we had some better videos. So, awesome. And I've used it once or twice myself, but yeah.
Yeah, in real life, there's a lot more screaming, a lot more moving. Yeah. That's like I said, man, if you have the opportunity to get a live rep, you do a live rep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, so when we're teaching law enforcement officers, I tell them all the time, I'm like, hey guys, 2 things about treating, guys that you've shot possibly.
Yeah.
1, if you're treating the injury that you just caused by taking it to lethal force, you completely remove the idea from everybody standing around that you're trying to kill the person, because otherwise you wouldn't be trying to save their life. And 2, now you get to treat a wound that otherwise you may not get to treat another time before you have to do that exact same skill on a coworker, or your partner, for Lord's sake. So, like, take every opportunity you can to get your hands bloody.
Yeah,
with gloves on.
I've had that opportunity having to treat one of the bad guys, and it's funny that I had that the same thing that you just said was something that the DA's reps came to talk to us about. They said, what you guys do here now is unquestionable.
Right.
It's like you just showed it on video. You just showed exactly what your mission is, and that's awesome. Because like a week after that happened, 2 weeks after that happened, I was teaching the class with an 18 Delta, and he was talking about getting live reps. And he's saying, yeah, man, it's like you get a live rep, you go do it. And you want to get your hands in there as much as possible. So training has changed, the gear has changed. What was your first big experience out there? Ben, you got sent to 18 Delta school, and we're right in the middle of post 9/11 stuff. So I'm sure it wasn't long before you got sent out. What was the first experience like? Because I know everybody sees the movies and everybody talks about it. When you're going through training, you had a lot of guys who were probably experienced operators who were pushing you all through training. What was it like for you?
The training or operational?
Your first operation now.
Oh, wow. Nothing replaces that first time you've been shot at, or yes, being actually shot at. Like, there's a difference. There's a large difference between hearing gunshots being fired and then being fired at you. And this wasn't my first experience, but it's a fairly funny one. On the rotation to Afghanistan, where I lost my left leg, which we haven't talked about yet, but I stepped on an IED during a game of hopscotch, and not really.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I stepped on an IED, lost a leg, and so earlier in that rotation, part of our element moved forward to start doing all the handover of equipment with the team that we were replacing. And a couple of days later, me and the rest of the guys flew in. And that day they had planned a resupply. And so we were in a place called Kajur, Afghanistan. It's looks like a bowl on the map. And we're surrounded on all sides by bad guys, exactly where SF guys are supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, we get resupplied by air. They'd fly over, push some pallets out the back with parachutes. We go out, collect them up, put them on the back of a truck with a forklift, and then drive back into our compound with them, and that way. So I had just landed, and they were getting ready to go out on the resupply, and I hopped on a Polaris Ranger with one of my other team guys, and we ran out there, and we're standing out there talking a little bit, and one of the Terps starts running past us, and I'm like, "Where are you going?" He goes, "We're about to be ambushed." And I'm like, "From where?" I get about where out of my mouth, and I hear in the distance, doo, 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 doo. And I turn to look at Dave, and right as I turn to look at Dave, like, rounds are striking at both of our feet, and we start doing a little happy dance a little bit, and then we move around behind the Polaris Ranger where our weapons were. And I'll never forget, like, us making jokes about being shot at that day, which wasn't, which became an almost everyday occurrence thereafter, but right up till I got blown up. But being fired at is, not something that you will ever forget. It's something to watch it happen or see it impacting around you, but to hear it either come past you or at your feet, a wholly different thing. Honestly, that's one of my most memorable deployments. First one was to South America, I said that earlier, and then some deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. But my first deployment was great because I got to do the SF thing from the foreign internal defense side, where we were training Colombian soldiers to continue to defend their nation in another language, and then trips to Iraq and Afghanistan where we were involved in direct combat. But it's an eye opener. Yeah.
So I know you said you've been injured several times, and obviously the last one was probably the biggest one. What was aside from the leg, what was the more memorable or most memorable injury?
well, that one was, that one was very memorable. Probably the next memorable one was 2 weeks earlier than that, literally 14 days, 8 hours, and 6 minutes apart. I was in a MATV, which is like, it's an up-armored vehicle that I would say looks a lot like a Lamborghini had sex with an MRAP, or
All right.
up-armored. You know
I
what an
gotcha,
MRAP
yeah,
is?
yeah.
Yeah. So if you cross a Lamborghini and an MRAP, you end up with an MATV. They're shorter, wider, squattier, fit 5 dudes. There's a gunner in the middle with a gun above him with a whole bunch of screens. So wherever he turns, the screens follow, and he's looking through a camera, and it's being input onto the screen. So a bunch of advanced, hardware. And I was in the truck commander seat, the TC seat, which is the right front seat. And we were going to do a meeting with some folks in a village not too far from where we were in Kosher, and drove over a command detonated IED, and IED went off right underneath the passenger front wheel, or right in front of where I was sitting. Opened the passenger door, partially ejected me out the door, and then I took a piece of the roll cage from under the vehicle in the back of my left leg. So the same leg that I would end up losing 14 days, 8 hours, 6 minutes later. So got evac to the same hospital. Like, the vehicle got hit, got out of the vehicle, returned fire. We ended up killing the guy that set off the IED with a Carl Gustav, or 82 millimeter rocket round. It was an airburst round that just basically exploded over top of him and just turned him into pink mist. But and then myself and the gunner that was in the truck got evac together. That was his 5th IED incident, and he was talking about having mashed potatoes for breakfast. So I'm like, yeah, you got to go too. The team sergeant from our team, because I can't see, I can't torque myself around and see the back of my left knee, he ended up treating me that time, and ended up treating me the second time as well. So got evac, had a piece of steel removed from the leg. Team sergeant says it was a soda can, but soda cans don't make holes like that. But I think that was more of a joke about the soda can, just to get underneath my skin, as he says. So it was quite memorable 2 weeks. It was.
So 14 days, 8 hours, and 6 minutes later.
Yep.
Tell me about that.
So we were going out to take care of some unexploded ordnance, and which are could be any number of things, like IEDs that were found, or rocket propelled grenades being fired that hit the ground and it don't explode. Made a little patrol. We had split. The element was coming back into town, and went to move down an alleyway to lay some scunion on some bad guys, and went to hop over a ditch at mid-sprint, and stepped on the pressure, the device on the near side of the ditch, and it went off underneath me as I was spread eagle over top of it. Severed my left leg about mid-tibia, about midway down the lower leg. Blew a roughly 6-inch hole in my perineum, or taint, pardon the term. And then it set me down on my backside. I sat up, looked around. I'm like, what was that? I thought it might have been an RPG fired into the alleyway. Oftentimes when RPG, the motor runs out of propellant, you'll never hear it until it hits, as opposed to hearing it whir by if it's under power when it comes past you. So I thought maybe one had fallen at my feet and went off basically where I was standing, and it hadn't. I'd stepped on it. So like I said, severed the left leg below the knee, blew a big old hole in my pelvis. Fractured my pelvis in 7 places. A bunch of small or soft tissue injuries to everything from my left lower leg to my left forearm. The inside of my right leg was completely messed up from shrapnel, and then planted me on my backside. I, radioed that I'd been, that I was down, and my team sergeant comes running up the same alleyway that I had just, where I was just at, doing absolutely the wrong thing. Thankful that he did it, though. Thankful that he did so, and started treating me for, bleeding out from my pelvis. Had severed both the left internal and the right common iliac arteries, and was bleeding pretty friggin' profusely. So he took to treating those. I was asking him if my junk was okay. That was the only thing I was concerned with.
Primary question.
Hey, 1% my backside, like that crap's important, So, I've never contemplated suicide. Like that may be the one to do it though.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's anyway. So we, the next guy to me was the Afghan, temporary on their side, the Afghan Special Forces medic that I'd spent the last couple months, training and helping every day. He hopped off of, he was manning a 50 cal on the backside of our compound, and a pair of Adidas slip-in shower shoes and a pair of white BVDs.
Wow.
That was all he was wearing. Yep.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And then he came over, like he's, they're working on me, and he's standing right over me. And they ended up picking me up by my belt, putting me on a Talon litter that's made by North American Rescue, and carried me inside the compound, put me on the back of a Polaris 6x6, and they rode me up to the front of the compound on the back of the 6x6, and then they picked me up and set me on the ground on the stretcher, and then the young infantry guy we had like 11 infantry guys there that were providing security, and they go out on missions with us and whatnot. So he hops on the Polaris, goes to put it in gear, puts it in reverse, and tries to back the rear two wheels up over top of my chest. And I'm like, really, can this go any worse today? It's okay, you can laugh. Like other guys around are like, really? Like
a Chevy Chase.
Yeah. Like one of the senior Bravo from the team, Pablo Rodriguez, stepped up and tried to deadlift the back of the Polaris, to keep it from sitting on my chest. And I'm like, today can't get much worse. We're, so.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you remember, you stayed conscious
Yep.
for the whole thing? You said you got on the radio to radio in.
Yeah.
So I've got a friend who was run over. He's a cop, and they were on the way home from a visit to the hunting lease and all, and they were stopping to help people out. He got run over. Flatbed trailer basically ran over the top of him. He ended up losing his leg, but he says, I remember every bit of it. He said, it didn't knock me out. I was in pain, and I remember going through it. Obviously, you were in pain. You had a lot of injuries, big injuries, and you were bleeding out. Let's go back to the training. If you hadn't had the level of training that you guys had, what would the difference have been? Because I think it all goes back to the training. You're, people say you'll rise to the occasion, and I think it's complete BS. I think you fall back to exactly how you were trained.
Pardon the phrase.
Yeah.
Life is not a Viagra commercial.
Yeah.
Ain't nobody rising to the occasion.
Yeah.
You fall back to the level of training that you show proficiency at. Right. So we talked about tourniquets earlier and people applying them. There's a lot of dudes who will say, hey, it's a tourniquet, how hard can it be, right? But while you're either under fire and you're trying to treat somebody who you have an emotional attachment to, or you're trying to treat yourself with something that you have never used, it is not going to go well.
Yeah.
Working through malfunctions with a firearm, whether it's a pistol or a carbine, if you've never practiced that, it's not going to go well. Any number of scenarios, it has to be practiced. Our psyche works that way for a reason. Some of it, I wish I hadn't had the amount of training, the medical training, because I knew exactly what I was bleeding from. But I'm very thankful that my team sergeant at the time wasn't an 18 Delta. He was not acting like he wasn't acting like an 18 Delta. He was the team sergeant. He carried an aid bag, but I was the primary medic. So he was there as the backup in the event that I was overwhelmed, which I was that day. I remember from me stepping on the device, aside from the confusion about whether it went off at my feet or whether it went off underneath my feet, I remember every bit of it.
Yeah.
I'm very thankful I remember every bit of it. Have no, clearly make jokes about it.
Yeah.
None of that stuff. People ask all the time, like, how do you make jokes about stuff like that? And I'm like, that's just my personality. Like, if I didn't, there would be a problem.
Oh,
The day I stopped making jokes about, playing hopscotch with an IED is the day that people need to worry about my psyche. But as long as I'm making jokes about it, we're good.
So a couple of things. We talked about different levels of medics earlier, but with your level of experience, you know how much time you had with those injuries, the amount of blood you were losing. If you can, number one, hit on how much time you actually had you not had somebody there that close to start providing medical care for you. But the other thing is we talked about, and I had brought this up to our medical director is Jeff Kane. And he's got a lot of experience in that type of medicine. And I've asked him before, it's like, who's the best medics out there? And I throw the SEAL medics, the 18 Deltas, the Corpsmen, the PJs. And we talked a little bit about that. We talked to that. Can you maybe hit on, number one, how much time you actually had to live if somebody hadn't been there for you, and the level of training that those guys got? Why you think training's so important?
So, let me first kind of start on the timeline piece. One of the pieces I didn't touch on previously, like from the amputation, like my leg wasn't bleeding. Let me rephrase that. It wasn't bleeding the way people think it would bleed if you had a traumatic amputation like that. It was dripping, but nothing major. And one of the things that I see people do all the time is they will see an amputation, and if you say, is it bleeding? And you say, it's just dripping, they will bypass the amputation and go to work on something else and forget about the amputation. Amputations get tourniquets, no question, whether it's bleeding or not, because if it's not bleeding, it's because the vascular has tightened down around it, or the heat has cauterized the smaller vessels, or they're completely out of blood and they're dead. So there's only 3 instances that it won't bleed. But if they still have blood in their body, it will eventually start bleeding. And if you bypass it to go on to something else or someone else, that may, you may either forget about it or they bleed out before you get back to them. So those things get treated regardless of whether you see them bleeding actively or not. After that, I would probably say, aside from the tourniquet part, 3-4 minutes, most. Like it was bleeding pretty good, on its own. Got a whole bunch of combat gauze packed inside my pelvis. Despite the other pain that I was experiencing from a left forearm injury, soft tissue injury to my pelvis, lower leg, and my right leg, I still felt every movement of his hand inside of me. Luckily, I don't know. Like, I guess I'm just built tough. I don't know. People ask all the time, like, how did you take that much pain? And I'm like, I don't know that I was taking it as much as, like it was a choice kind of thing. Right. So, but a couple minutes, and then from a training perspective, you have to see wounds. Like if you've never seen somebody's pelvis injured like that, the first couple minutes are probably not going to go well. The recognizing what's bleeding and then knowing what needs to be done about it is paramount to that casualty surviving. And then knowing how much blood they've lost, being able to estimate that loss as a medic, and then know how much fluid to give or withhold from that patient from non-compressible bleeds. Because like a tourniquet is an immediate compressible issue. You can just, an amputation, you put a tourniquet around it, the limb, and stop the bleeding, right? Anytime you're packing a wound, you may or may not be as good at that as you think you are. And oftentimes it will not show itself in a large cavity like the pelvis. Like you could, lose a third of your circulating blood volume inside your pelvis and never bleed outside the pelvis. So those patients you don't want to give a lot of blood to, or not blood, but a lot of fluid to, because you don't want their blood pressure blowing any clots that you've built through the wound packing process.
Gotcha.
So, but back to the medic piece, Kurt, my team sergeant at the time, had spent a lot of time over behind the fence at Fort Bragg with a Tier 1 unit, and had just come over to 7th Group to pick up 8 and become a team sergeant. But he was the primary caregiver all the way up to the end when I got on a helicopter. He treated everything that was life-threatening. Pablo Rodriguez, the Bravo or the weapons guy, was trying to bandage my stump. That was quite frankly painful. Bone ends rubbing together and all. And then I, at some point I said I can't take any more pain. Like I've had enough pain. Like I got to have something for pain. And he started a sternal IO intraosseous on me, and gave me a little pain meds, a little ketamine, a little fentanyl, and then things were kind of spotty until I got on the helicopter. And then the rest of the team, right before I got on the helicopter, they landed, and then they said a little prayer, and then the next time I saw them was on VTC video teleconference from my hospital room at Walter Reed. The best medic is the one that's there when you need them.
Yeah, absolutely.
A bad medic can oftentimes be a better medic than no medic, but regardless of whether it's a medic, somebody who has just taken a TECC class, stop the bleed, the person that has the tools at the time that are needed is the best one to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the huge message for all of you guys out there with the skills. It's a great skill to have, but if you're not passing that information on, if you're not sharing with people, if you're not getting people up to your level or close to your level, if you're not giving that out, you're holding it, and you're not. You can't take it with you. You can.
Oh no,
but it's not going to help.
Yeah, it's like money.
Yeah.
You ain't taking it to the other side.
Yeah, it's just dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if you hadn't put in time with those guys and really turned that Afghan into a special forces medic, who knows what would have happened? All your guys there, everybody else. But like you said, it's the guy who's there to treat you is the one that's the most important one out there. And we talked to the level. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like there was some language barriers. Like I spoke Pashto, but it wasn't great.
Yeah.
It's about like my Spanish. I can make do getting a beer into the bathroom, and that's about it. But every morning I spent with that guy doing sick call on his dudes, and he learned through watching. Like he would come up, watch me do sick call on the infantry guys, from foot problems to a litany of other issues that they cause themselves throughout the day or night. Yeah. And but like being a part of whether you're the person that's being educated or you're just watching it takes place, is better than none. And but like all of those life treatments that will either end with somebody living or dying, like tourniquet placement, wound packing, chest seals for penetrating trauma to the chest. If you don't spend time looking at people and figuring out where the places are that you will miss if you don't look, you will miss. Yeah. The most common place for a gunshot wound to be missed in a female is underneath the breast. Yeah. Guys don't want to move, don't want to touch women's breasts. Yeah. For fear of getting sued. But I would rather get sued and the person live than not and they die, because then I got to carry that all with me every other day. And guys, it's in and around their groin.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of big vessels that run through that area, and if you don't know where those are, you need to familiarize yourself with them.
Sure.
So, and then just practicing with what you carry, simple stuff like tourniquet drills. Like, regardless of how many tourniquets I have applied overseas and here in the States, like, I still do tourniquet drills. Anytime my SWAT team guys are doing medicine, I'm doing medicine. It doesn't have to be all day. Be small stuff, and then finding, for the non-medical personnel, finding ways that they can rationalize treatments with injury patterns. So like if we're on the range doing pistol and carbine stuff, I may talk about gunshot wounds to the chest. If we're doing explosive breaching, maybe talk about TBIs, traumatic brain injury, and overpressure, or any number of lung injuries from overpressure. Things of that nature, so that folks that aren't medical or that don't have the experience and training, like, some of that stuff sticks. It'd be, like, it's really odd how people associate injuries with training, right?
Yeah.
So you may never see another gunshot wound, and somebody say something on a podcast or in a training that just piques your interest and it sticks. But it is certainly important to keep your hands busy with doing medicine if you're involved in it, from across public safety, fire, EMS, law enforcement guys. Nobody joins law enforcement to be a paramedic. I get it, right? But nobody wants to go home having watched their partner die because they didn't want to do something.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
a whole lot worse problem to have.
Yeah, I think those, speaking to that side, it's like one of those things. It's like, if we're going to train you to, like you talked about earlier, treating somebody you caused a wound on, somebody you had to shoot. If you could do that, like, if you can cause this kind of injury, if we're not teaching you how to treat that kind of injury, because those kind of injuries may be coming on us, then we're selling you short.
Absolutely.
And that's one of those things. I think everybody is being taught how to, or going through their license to carry classes. I think they should have to go through stop the bleeds. All the other things should be the same. Well, you've had an endless amount of training. You've had go ahead, man.
No, I was just going to say, according to FBI statistics, a law enforcement officer is far more likely to apply a tourniquet than they are to use that firearm.
Yeah.
And absolutely. If you carry the one you're least likely to use, why wouldn't you know how to use the one you're most likely to use?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you've had endless amounts of training. You have crazy amounts of injuries, and you actually you're still working in the field. You work at North American Rescue, who I think is one of the best manufacturers out there. The products that you all push out there are great. They're phenomenal products. But if James Davenport's going to hold a class on what to carry for a standard loadout for a civilian, for the standard soccer mom driving her kids to soccer practice, what do you put in their go bag? 2 tourniquets, set of chest seals, a roll of duct tape, because medical tape sticks to 2 things, gloves in itself, a bunch of Band-Aids, a little moleskin for soccer, foot sliding around in the shoe, combat gauze, and an ace, and a couple ace wraps, and maybe a SAM splint. All right, that's a good list of products. And I told you earlier, I had the chance to sit with some of the rescue guys from Honolulu, and they laughed when I asked them, "What do you suggest that when they're heading out on the trails there in Hawaii? What do you want to see them carrying?" And they laughed because they said they've seen people with these great medical bags when they go hiking, and they end up ditching them out on the trail because they're just too damn heavy for them. But a lot of people carry stuff that they just don't know how to use. So I think it's most important for us to leave that message out there for everybody. It's like, man, if you're going to carry tourniquets, know how to use them. Yeah, get some training. Absolutely. And there's tons of videos out there. You guys put videos out there. Yeah. Yep. I mean, we got everything that we carry has a video attached to it at some point. Especially all the advanced stuff, needles for
like the spear for tension pneumothorax or IO devices. Like there's, I don't expect a soccer mom to be running around with an IO device unless she's a nurse or, paramedic. But even still, it's the small things. There has to be a balance between what you're most likely to use and what you can't survive without.
Sure.
And so the Band-Aids and Neosporin on one end to tourniquets and chest seals on the other. Now, I mean, chest seals are good for a litany of other things than just putting on, penetrating trauma to the chest that you be used to hold on, cut into pieces, used for moleskin in a pinch, or, same thing with tape. Medical tape's horrible in the field, especially if you're wet or sweaty or bloody. Duct tape sticks to everything. Yeah. So, but knowing how to use the items that you do carry, is uber important. I've heard people say, well, you should carry a bunch of stuff. That way, if somebody shows up, they have stuff to use. Well, if you don't know what it is and what it's used for, you're probably not going to mention it when somebody shows up. It's, like dump the bottom out of the trash can and hope that you come across something that you know how to use. Yeah. Just get training. It's too easy.
Oh, yeah. And that's it. Like I said, if you have that amount of training, pass it on to somebody. I've got cool videos of my kids doing cover and move drills.
Oh, that's awesome.
With and without tourniquets on themselves. And it's just, it's like, hey, I've learned how to do this, and I don't teach y'all how to do this, and you guys need that kind of training at some point, and I didn't pass that on to you, I'd feel worthless.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I have a daughter that's in college, and it's much the same way. Like, she has body armor in her car. She's got a get home bag. Yeah. A few other items that.
Oh yeah, I got you.
But if it does her no good to have a bunch of stuff that she can't use. Like changing oil in your car.
Yeah.
So, or having a spare tire in your car. If you don't know how to change it, and especially as a man, you should know how to change your tire.
Yeah.
How to, put fuel in your vehicle, change the oil, or at least add oil if you're low, kind of things. And every one of those things could have life-altering effects if you can't, you take a trip too far from home.
Yeah.
So
it seems like when we circled right back to the training again, we talk back to the training at home and bringing, passing that training on to the kids. But man, we've been going for an hour and 16 minutes now, and I think we could probably keep on going for another 2 or 3 hours just with the stuff that we haven't covered. But to be respectful of your time, and I know the guys are trying to wrap things up outside, what's one of the messages you want to leave behind for these guys, or what's one of the messages you want to close out with?
Don't leave for tomorrow what you can train on today. Yeah. You might not get another chance before that skill is needed. Not only save strangers, but save your own family members. I don't I'm not a put off training kind of guy. So, guys at my department, the Anderson Sheriff's Office that I work with hate me because as long as there's, light in the day or batteries in the knobs, they're going to be moving. So, putting off training is not the thing to put off,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't put off training. I think it's a great message to send.
So many people that will just be, we'll catch that tomorrow. There maybe not, and there's certain things that you can only fit so much in a day, right? But the items that will aid you in going home to your family or another person going home to their family should be at the top of that list, not at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest messages they pushed to us going through the academy. So you have to make sure that you go home at night, go home after your shift. And if you're not training, you can't be sure that that's going to happen.
Nope.
Yeah.
With respect to law enforcement, what's the one item that law enforcement officers carry that makes a difference and could make a difference in whether they or somebody else goes home at night, aside from your firearm?
Man, there's a ton of stuff, but your
tourniquet.
Yeah. And when everybody carries them now.
Yeah.
When I started, we didn't have tourniquets. About halfway through my career, we started getting tourniquet training and started issuing tourniquets. But the time that I had on an actual injury, it was all my gear that I was using. But yeah, just because I'd been trained by guys like you.
Well, we see, guys because we go to trade shows, officers will come up and, see the table and they're like, what's this? And I'm like, it's a hot air balloon. What's it? It's a tourniquet. What's it look like? Back to that, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Smart ass comment. But I'm like, you carry one? No, I've never need one. I don't see why I need to carry one now. My next question is, well, how many people have you shot? Well, I've never shot anybody. Well, then you don't need your gun.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we can't use what we have done as a measure of what we will do.
Man, that's a great message. There's something good to close out on there, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hesitant, there for a while, but I've enjoyed it.
James, I appreciate you taking time to do it, man. Passing on the message. I think this is about the same as passing on the training, passing on the message, passing on your experiences, where you've been, all you guys out there that have operated out there or had the kind of operations and training and experiences. It's real important for you guys to send that message out there and share the information. I talked to Nick Lavery. I don't know if you know Nick.
Nick and I were at Walter Reed together. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yep. I know Nick well.
Yeah, I had a chance to sit and talk to him and said, how many times have you had to tell your story? And he talks about sharing the story all the time because it's important, because he says there's things there that I should have done differently and I didn't. So, but the after actions are the most important, crucial part of any team. If you're not doing a good, thorough after action for your team and for yourself, then there's no growth and there's nobody going to get better off of that.
No, institutional inbreeding is what occurs.
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
You're just you're passing on the same stuff that was passed to you, and nothing's changing. AARs for everybody in every aspect, not just how did you do in the room or in the structure, or did you get your corners, whatnot. It's the other pieces as well. Were comms made appropriately? Did you pass up the information need to be passed up in a timely manner so that people further up the chain can make the decisions they need to make to better assist you in doing your mission? Or to take opportunities to treat individuals? Did you bring everything you should have brought on the mission instead of leaving stuff behind because it was heavy, or like the Ram, or did you have an appropriate number of interior door charges? AARs are certainly important. It's funny, bringing up AARs. I had a little bit of an exchange with the British SAS for about 9 months, and those guys are brutal in their AARs. Like everybody gets this is what you did wrong. And it isn't what you got, like a lot of times guys are like, you have to have 2 positives, 2 sustains and 2 changes, like it's all changes.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to be patted on the back for what you did right. You need to be kicked in the butt for what you didn't do right. People.
I love that message. Yeah, I love that message. My son told that story. I don't remember how he passed it on. He said, "Dad's not a fan of getting awards for doing your job." It's like, yeah,
bingo.
Yeah.
That's like the Purple Heart is an enemy marksmanship badge.
You're right. Yeah.
So, not real happy about those, but I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Quick exchange. All right. Well, thanks for being here, James. Can't thank you enough for doing this. I'm going to let the camera fade out and we'll wrap it up.